There is a quiet truth we often forget, that the mind is not a machine, but a garden, and like any garden, it flourishes not by force, but through careful tending, nourishment, and light. What we call mental illness is not always a brokenness to be feared, but often a signal, an inner whisper, asking us to pause, to listen, to return to what matters. Each thought, each emotion, even each struggle, is a thread in a tapestry far greater than we can see, woven through with purpose and possibility. The storms within us are not signs of failure, but of depth proof that we are alive, feeling, becoming. You are not your pain. You are the observer, the healer, the artist of your inner world. And when we learn to see the brain not as the enemy, but as the gateway to healing, we do not just change a life, we transform a soul. Asterisk, asterisk, for within the architecture of your mind lies the blueprint of your becoming. Asterisk, asterisk, imagine walking into a beautiful garden, sunlight dancing on leaves, pathways winding gently through flowers, old trees whispering stories in the breeze. Now imagine that same garden untended, overgrown, forgotten. Weeds choking the life out of beauty, roots tangled in confusion, the soil depleted. The difference isn't in the seed, but in how the garden is cared for. That's how we must begin to see the human mind not as a battlefield, but as sacred ground. Not something broken to be fixed, but something alive to be understood, nurtured, transformed. For too long we've treated mental illness like an enemy to be conquered. Labels are thrown like weapons: depression, anxiety, trauma, bipolar, and though diagnosis can be helpful, it is never the whole story. We've come to believe that if you feel broken, then you are broken. But what if that's not true? What if the pain is a signal, not a sentence? You see, the brain is the most intricate organ in the universe, more complex than any galaxy, more dynamic than any machine we've ever built. And yet, it's also deeply sensitive. It remembers every hit, every toxin, every betrayal, every sleepless night. It holds your traumas, yes, but it also holds your potential. And just like a garden left in darkness, the mind can lose its way when it doesn't receive the light it needs. But it's never beyond repair. I've looked at thousands of brain scans over the years. What I've seen is that behavior is never just about willpower or character. It's biology, it's chemistry, it's history, it's injury. People aren't weak because they're struggling. They're often carrying silent injuries no one has seen. They're trying to grow in soil that's been poisoned or ignored. And when you look at the brain, you see the truth. People aren't lazy or crazy or hopeless. They're wounded. They're in need of healing, not judgment. This shift in thinking changes everything. When we move away from blame and toward understanding, we begin to see ourselves and others differently. We stop asking, "What's wrong with you?" and start asking, "What happened to your brain?" That single change creates space for healing. It removes the shame and replaces it with compassion. And in that space, transformation begins. This is where the power of care comes in. You wouldn't try to fix a garden with a hammer. You wouldn't shout at a plant to grow. Yet that's how we often treat mental health, through force, neglect, or shame. True transformation requires a gentler, wiser approach. It requires sunlight, rest, nourishment, love, and consistent attention. It means choosing the right nutrients for the brain, calming the chaos with mindfulness, feeding the soul with connection, and removing the toxins that steal our peace, whether those toxins are physical, emotional, or digital. Healing the brain is not a one-size-fits-all path. Each mind is different, each injury unique. That's why we must look deeply, not just at the symptoms, but at the structure, the function, the story behind the suffering. When we do, what we find is not a diagnosis to fear, but a path to hope. The brain is remarkably resilient. Just as soil can regenerate, Just as light can return to a shadowed garden, the brain can heal if we give it the chance. And this isn't just about individuals. This is about how we treat mental health as a culture. Ending mental illness as we know it means no longer separating the brain from the mind or the person from their biology. It means no longer waiting until someone is in crisis to offer help. It means making brain health central to every conversation we have about wellness, education, relationships, even spirituality. Because when we transform the way we see the brain, we transform the way we live. So, I invite you to stop seeing the mind as a battleground and start seeing it as sacred ground. Honor it, tend to it, walk through its pathways with care, because the truth is there's nothing wrong with your mind. It's just been waiting for someone to notice the garden, to pull the weeds, and to let the light in. *** healing doesn't begin with fixing what's broken, it begins with seeing what's beautiful. ***, every single thought you have sends a ripple through the universe of your brain. That's not poetry, it's biology. Thoughts are not just abstract ideas that drift through the mind like clouds. They are real physical events. They leave behind chemical trails. They trigger neural pathways. They shape the structure of your brain over time. Every moment you entertain a thought, whether it's kind or cruel, anxious or grateful, it changes you. It molds the brain in microscopic ways, reinforcing some pathways, weakening others. This is what we call neuroplasticity, and it's one of the most hopeful truths we've ever discovered. For decades, we believed the brain was fixed, unchanging after a certain age, but now we know better. The brain is constantly rewiring itself, and your thoughts are among the most powerful tools in that process. The stories you tell yourself, the beliefs you repeat, the focus of your attention, all of it, leaves an imprint on your brain's architecture. Your inner world is not separate from your biology. It is your biology. Let's bring this into real life. Imagine someone who constantly thinks, "I'm not good enough. I'll never succeed." That thought, repeated over and over, begins to carve a groove in the brain, like water carving a canyon over time. That groove becomes familiar. The brain, always looking to conserve energy, begins to default to it. Soon, it's not just a thought, it's a mental habit. And then it becomes a belief. And that belief influences everything. How that person shows up in relationships, how they respond to stress, even how their body functions. It affects sleep, immune response, mood, and decision making. Now flip it. Imagine someone learning to think, "I am learning, I am healing, I am worthy of love and peace." That's not just a feel-good affirmation. That's rewiring. That's training the brain to default to calm instead of chaos, to resilience instead of despair. When you understand this, you start to realize something profound. You are not a passive passenger in your mental experience. You are the driver. You can shape your brain by shaping your thoughts. But here's the catch: your brain is always listening. It doesn't know the difference between a truth and a lie. So if you tell yourself repeatedly that you're worthless or incapable or a failure, your brain believes it. It starts to act accordingly, and so your life begins to mirror the thoughts you've given power to. This isn't magical thinking. This is neurochemistry. This is why it's so important to challenge what I call ants, automatic negative thoughts. These are the uninvited, unchallenged thoughts that crawl into your mind and set up camp. No one loves me. I always mess things up. I'm broken. They show up automatically, often rooted in past pain, trauma, or fear. But if left unchallenged, they can become the lens through which you see your entire life. You don't have to believe every thought you think. In fact, Learning to question your thoughts is one of the most powerful tools for healing the mind. This doesn't mean we deny pain or pretend everything is fine. It means we become curious. We ask, asterisk, is this thought helpful? Is it true? Is there another way to see this? Asterisk, when you engage your mind this way, you strengthen the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for focus, decision-making, and impulse control. In other words, you start to give more power to the part of your brain that helps you lead your life with wisdom rather than reaction. One of the most overlooked aspects of brain health is the mental environment we live in every day. The brain, like any organism, responds to its environment. If it's surrounded by negativity, chaos, violence, or fear, it adapts to survive in that environment, often by becoming hypervigilant, anxious, or numb. But if it's surrounded by peace, support, structure, and purpose, it begins to thrive. And this starts with the thoughts we feed it. Think of your thoughts like drops of water. One drop doesn't seem like much, but repeated, consistent drops can erode stone or carve out beauty. What you think about most becomes your mental reality. You become the thoughts you most often think. So how do we begin transforming the mind in this way? We start with awareness. Begin noticing the thoughts you entertain throughout the day. Are they aligned with the life you want to live? Are they building up your brain or breaking it down? Then, with compassion, redirect them. Plant thoughts that are true, hopeful, and strengthening. It's not about toxic positivity. It's about honest empowerment. You may not control every thought that enters your mind, but you do control which ones you dwell on. Remember, the brain responds to repetition. You can teach it anything, even peace, especially peace. And when you begin to consistently think in ways that are loving, empowering, and true, you're not just thinking differently. You're literally building a new brain. In the end, your brain becomes a reflection of the thoughts you most faithfully believe. And the good news is this: you can choose which ones to follow. You can choose which ones to feed. And by doing that, you begin the sacred work of healing not just your mind, but your life. Asterisk, asterisk, you are only ever one thought away from changing your brain and rewriting your story. Asterisk, asterisk, it's easy to believe the brain and the soul are two separate things. One, a dense organ of flesh and electricity. The other, something immaterial and eternal. Science tells us how neurons fire, how chemistry shapes emotion. Spirituality tells us why we feel, what meaning those feelings carry. For centuries, we've been told these are two different conversations. But the truth is they are one. The brain and the soul are dance partners. They move together, respond to each other, shape one another in quiet, often unseen ways. You cannot touch one without moving the other. The brain, as we now know, is where the soul expresses itself. It's the stage where your purpose, your relationships, your pain, your joy, all of it plays out. It holds the echoes of your past and the possibilities of your future. When you're anxious or depressed, it's not just a chemical imbalance. It's the soul trying to speak through a wounded organ. When the brain is injured by trauma, by toxins, by neglect, it becomes harder for the soul to shine through. Like music trying to play through a broken speaker, the message gets distorted, misheard. And what we often interpret as weakness or disorder might, in truth, be a signal, an invitation to heal the vessel so the deeper self can emerge. I've seen people carry shame for what they thought was a moral failure, addiction, outbursts, hopelessness, when, in fact, they were suffering from undiagnosed brain injuries or long-standing imbalances. These weren't bad people. They were people whose souls were intact, but whose brains had lost clarity, function, and peace. And when we began to heal the brain, something miraculous happened. Their true selves returned. The soul could finally speak clearly, and suddenly there was direction again, light again, joy even. We are not separate from our biology. Our purpose is not separate from our physiology. We are whole beings, spiritual and neurological, emotional and electrical. When we separate those truths, we fracture our healing, but when we bring them together, we begin to transform. Healing becomes more than symptom management, it becomes awakening. Think about love. That feeling you get when you're with someone who truly sees you, when you're wrapped in connection, that's not just emotion, that's chemistry. That's oxytocin flooding your brain, calming the amygdala, increasing trust and connection. But it's also more than chemistry, it's meaning, it's divine. So often we think the sacred must be separate from science, but real healing happens when we see how intricately woven they are. The divine isn't somewhere far off, it's operating through your neurobiology, expressing itself in every breath, every heartbeat, every surge of emotion. We must stop thinking of the brain as merely a machine. Yes, it has systems, circuits, signals, but it's also the gateway through which meaning flows. When we heal the brain, we don't just restore function, we restore connection. We quiet the noise that drowns out intuition. We clear the fog that dims insight. We remove the static so that the deeper wisdom, the one we all carry, can finally come through. If the brain is misfiring, even the most well-intentioned soul may struggle to find clarity. If your frontal lobes are underactive, decision-making becomes harder. If your limbic system is overactive, the world feels darker than it is. It's not a character flaw, it's a biological reality. But biology isn't destiny. With the right tools, nutrition, love, rest, treatment, faith, and focus, we can restore balance. And when the brain returns to health, we remember who we are. We come back to ourselves. This is why, when we talk about ending mental illness as we know it, we're really talking about restoring wholeness. No more dividing people into mind versus body, spirit versus science. We need to ask deeper questions. What is the brain trying to say? What is the soul asking for through this struggle? That shift in perspective can change everything. Because here's the truth. There's a reason you feel the way you do. Your emotions are not random. Your suffering is not senseless. They are signals, sacred messengers, guiding you back to the root, back to what needs attention, back to alignment. When you treat the brain and the soul together, those signals become easier to read. You begin to hear not just the noise of the pain, but the music underneath it, and it's beautiful. Even in its ache, even in its rawness, it's beautiful. You are not your diagnosis. You are not the worst thing that's ever happened to you. You are not defined by your darkest thought. Beneath all of that is a soul longing to be heard and a brain that can help it speak clearly again. The two are not at odds. They're partners. And when we honor both, we unlock a kind of healing that isn't just about survival. It's about becoming fully alive. The greatest transformations I've ever witnessed weren't just chemical or emotional. They were spiritual. They happened when someone's brain was healed enough for their light to return. When the fog cleared, and they could see not just the world but themselves, with clarity and grace. So let us stop separating what was never meant to be divided. Let us heal the brain, so the soul can rise. Asterisk, asterisk, when the brain and soul move in harmony, your true self is finally free to dance. Asterisk, asterisk, let's pause here and ask something we rarely ask with real sincerity. Asterisk, what happened to you? Asterisk, not, what's wrong with you? Not, why can't you just be better? But gently, curiously, what happened? Because behind every symptom, every outburst, every silence, there is a story. And for many people struggling with their mental health, that story is layered in trauma, in pain, in neglect. Not always visible, not always dramatic, but almost always real. The brain, you see, records everything, even what you try to forget. Trauma changes the brain. That's not just a poetic idea, it's a biological fact. When you experience something overwhelming or frightening and you don't feel safe, your brain shifts to survival mode. It rewires itself. Certain areas like the amygdala become more reactive. Others like the prefrontal cortex can go offline. And the hippocampus, which helps us distinguish between past and present, may shrink. This means that even years later, your body can react as if the trauma is happening now. A sound, a smell, a look, suddenly your heart races, your thoughts spiral, and you don't know why. That's not weakness, that's wiring. Now, this might sound discouraging, but it's not. It's actually the beginning of hope, because what has been wired in by pain asterisk can be rewired with care. Asterisk, the brain is plastic. It adapts, it grows, it can learn safety again, it can learn peace. But first, we have to stop shaming people for what their brains did to survive. Anxiety, hypervigilance, withdrawal, dissociation, these aren't broken behaviors. They are adaptations. They are the brain's way of saying, I had to protect you. When we start seeing mental illness through this lens, through the lens of trauma, of injury, of adaptation, we stop blaming. And something incredible happens when we stop blaming. People begin to heal. They stop defending, and they start softening. Because for the first time, they feel seen not as a diagnosis, but as a whole human being. Children who grew up in chaos don't just get over it. Adults who have lived through loss, abuse, neglect, they don't just move on because time has passed. Trauma embeds itself in the brain and body. It becomes a filter. It affects attention, mood, sleep, memory, digestion, even immune function. You can't just treat the symptoms and ignore the source. That's like putting a bandage on a broken bone and wondering why it still hurts. We need to become curious about each other's pain. We need to ask more questions, not give more judgments. What kind of environment did this person grow up in? Were they nurtured or neglected? Did anyone help them feel safe? Did anyone listen? Because the brain, especially in childhood, is incredibly sensitive to experience. And if that experience is filled with fear or rejection, the brain doesn't forget. But here's the miracle. No matter how deep the pain goes, healing is possible. I've seen brains that were ravaged by trauma begin to light up with new life. I've seen people who once lived in constant fear begin to rest, to trust, to love. And not because they forced themselves to be positive, but because someone finally gave them what they had always needed: understanding, structure, support, and safety. Safety heals. Relationships heal. Truth heals. The brain will come out of survival mode when it finally believes it's safe to do so. And creating that safety is not about big dramatic gestures. It's about small, consistent moments, someone listening without interrupting. Someone believing your story, someone not trying to fix you, but simply being with you. These are the building blocks of brain repair. And of course, healing also includes what we put into the body: nutrition, sleep, movement, healthy rhythms. But those things work best when paired with emotional safety. You can give someone all the right supplements in the world, but if they're living in fear or carrying unprocessed trauma, the body won't fully relax. The nervous system has to be told over and over again, you are safe now. That's not a one-time message, it's a daily practice. So whether you are someone struggling to heal or someone walking with another in pain, remember this: healing happens in layers. The brain unwinds slowly. You don't wake up one day suddenly transformed. But every day that you choose gentleness over judgment, curiosity over condemnation, you are helping the brain rewire itself for peace. Every time you breathe through fear rather than collapse into it, you are teaching your nervous system a new way to live. You are building strength, not the loud, performative kind, but the quiet, rooted kind that endures. We need to stop asking people to snap out of it and start asking how we can hold space for their story, because once we truly understand that mental illness is often the brain's adaptation to overwhelming pain, everything changes. We stop trying to silence the symptoms and we begin to honor the message, and that's when the real healing begins. Asterisk, when we stop asking what's wrong with people and start asking what happened to them, we open the door to a kind of healing that reaches all the way down to the roots. Asterisk, there's a quiet truth that often gets lost in the noise of diagnoses and medications and symptom checklists. Asterisk, the brain loves rhythm. Asterisk, it thrives in environments that are structured, predictable, and purposeful. Yet modern life has pulled us far from that natural rhythm. We wake up to alarms, rush through our days, feed our bodies things they can't recognize, and fall asleep with screens still glowing. And then we wonder why we feel anxious, unfocused, numb, or overwhelmed. But here's what we need to remember: the brain is deeply connected to everything we do, think, eat, and surround ourselves with. It doesn't operate in isolation. It's not just a machine waiting to be fixed when it breaks down. It's a living system, constantly responding to what we give it or deny it. If we want to end mental illness as we know it, we must begin by creating environments, inside and out, that nourish the brain daily. Start with food. Your brain is the most hungry organ in your body. It consumes about 20% of your total energy, even though it makes up only about 2% of your weight. What you feed it matters. If you're living on processed foods, sugars, and chemicals your ancestors wouldn't even recognize, you're starving your brain of what it truly needs. Healthy fats, clean proteins, leafy greens, antioxidants, these aren't just buzzwords. They are literal building blocks for mood, memory, focus, and emotional resilience. Every bite is either helping your brain or hurting it. The same goes for sleep. Sleep is not a luxury, it's essential maintenance. During deep sleep, your brain clears out toxins, processes memory, and restores emotional regulation. Skip sleep, and even the most balanced mind starts to fray. Irritability, anxiety, forgetfulness, they're not signs of failure. Often, they're signs of exhaustion. The brain is pleading for rest, for recovery, for stillness. We must stop glorifying burnout and start honoring the need for real, restorative sleep. Then there's movement, not exercise for the sake of appearance, but movement as medicine. When you move your body, you move energy. You increase blood flow to the brain, release feel-good chemicals, and reduce inflammation. You also shift your emotional state. You don't have to become a marathon runner. Even a simple walk, a few minutes of stretching, or dancing in your living room can change the chemistry of your mind. And let's talk about the spaces we live in. Your environment sends constant signals to your brain. If it's cluttered, chaotic, noisy, or filled with negative energy, your brain absorbs that stress. On the other hand, peaceful spaces, nature, music, art, these things don't just soothe the soul. They calm the nervous system. They signal safety, beauty, and balance. That's why spending even a few moments in nature can reduce anxiety and boost clarity. Your brain recognizes the rhythm of the natural world because it was made for it. But here's perhaps the most overlooked piece of all: purpose. The brain longs for meaning. Without a sense of why, even the most structured life can feel empty. When we feel disconnected from our sense of purpose, we start to drift. That's when mental health often begins to unravel, not because there's something inherently wrong with us, but because we've lost the thread of meaning that ties everything together. And that meaning doesn't have to be grand. It might be found in helping someone, in creating something beautiful, in nurturing a relationship, in growing spiritually. Purpose gives the brain a compass. It anchors us. These foundational elements, nutrition, sleep, movement, environment, purpose, are not optional extras. They are the baseline for a healthy mind. If someone is struggling with anxiety, depression, or focus issues, and we're not looking at what they're eating, how they're sleeping, whether they're moving, or whether they feel connected and purposeful, then we're not seeing the full picture. We're not giving the brain what it needs to thrive. You cannot drug a brain into healing if you're feeding it poison, depriving it of rest and keeping it in chaos. That's not medicine, that's management. True healing asks for alignment. The brain is constantly asking, am I safe? Am I nourished? Am I connected? Am I loved? When the answer to those questions is yes, it begins to heal, often in ways that look miraculous but really aren't. They're just what happens when you support the brain the way it was designed to be supported. So this is not about perfection. It's not about rigid rules. It's about learning to listen to the brain's needs and honoring them consistently and compassionately. It's about creating a daily rhythm that feeds rather than drains, that uplifts rather than depletes, that steadies rather than shakes. When we do this, when we align our lifestyles with the biology and beauty of the brain, we don't just treat mental illness. We begin to prevent it. We begin to live with clarity, vitality, and intention. And we begin to remember that healing isn't a destination, it's a rhythm, one we are all invited to move with. Asterisk, asterisk, to transform the mind, we must nourish the brain because healing begins with how we live every single day. Asterisk, asterisk, if we've come this far on the journey of transforming the mind, then there's one more truth we must be willing to embrace. Asterisk, we don't heal in isolation. Asterisk, the mind, brilliant and intricate as it is, does not exist in a vacuum. It is deeply influenced, shaped, and even rewired by the quality of our relationships. This is where the science of healing and the art of connection converge. If we're serious about ending mental illness as we know it, then we must elevate how we love, how we listen, and how we show up for one another. So much of mental suffering stems not just from internal chaos, but from relational injury. A child ignored, a teenager ridiculed, a partner betrayed, a heart broken without repair. The brain, sensitive and observant, encodes those moments not just as memories, but as templates for what to expect from the world. If someone learns early on that connection is dangerous, that vulnerability invites harm, or that love is conditional, the brain begins to armor itself, walls go up, trust goes down, and the result is often isolation masked by achievement, by busyness, or even by silence. But the truth is, we were not designed to walk alone. Connection is not optional, it is biological. From the moment we are born, we are wired to attach, to reach out, to seek safety in the eyes of another. And when that connection is consistent, safe, and loving, the brain flourishes. Neural networks of empathy, regulation, and memory grow stronger. Cortisol levels drop. Oxytocin rises. We sleep better. We cope better. We live better. Relationships, quite literally, are medicine. That's why healing must be relational. Yes, individual practices matter. Nutrition, sleep, movement, and mindset are foundational. But even the most disciplined wellness routine can feel hollow without belonging. Loneliness is now considered more dangerous than smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It weakens the immune system, raises inflammation, and increases the risk of depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline. The data is clear. We need each other, and not just surface-level interaction, but asterisk deep, attuned, authentic connection. Asterisk, so how do we create that? It begins with presence. To truly connect with another person, we must be willing to asterisk pause. Asterisk to put away distractions. To look into their eyes without scanning our phone. To listen not just with our ears, but with our whole body. Presence is powerful because it communicates the message we all long to hear. Asterisk, you matter, you're safe, I'm here. Asterisk, from that place of presence, we can practice attunement, the ability to feel what someone else is feeling without needing to fix it. This doesn't mean absorbing their pain, but sitting beside it with compassion. The brain heals when it is seen, not judged, when it is understood, not rushed, and that kind of attuned presence, especially when repeated over time, begins to rewire trust into the nervous system. It tells the brain, connection is possible. I don't have to be alone in this. Of course, real relationships also require courage. To be known is to be vulnerable. And for many people, especially those carrying trauma, vulnerability feels terrifying. But healing can't happen without some level of emotional risk, and the risk is worth it. Because each time we show up authentically, each time we speak our truth gently, each time we choose openness over withdrawal, we're not just growing closer to others. We're healing ourselves. Now, this also applies to the relationship we have with ourselves. Self-connection is the soil from which all other relationships grow. If we are constantly criticizing ourselves, shaming our thoughts, or numbing our emotions, how can we expect to offer compassion to others? The way we speak to ourselves becomes the script for how we speak to those around us. So we must begin within with self-forgiveness, self-awareness, and self-respect. Healing in community doesn't mean being surrounded by people all the time. It means finding even just one safe person. Someone who listens, someone who sees us clearly. That one relationship can change everything. It can be a therapist, a friend, a partner, a mentor. It can even be a support group or a spiritual guide. Healing accelerates when we stop hiding, and here's the beautiful part. The more we heal, the more healing we offer to others. Our peace becomes contagious. Our calm helps others regulate. Our willingness to connect inspires connection. This is how the cycle of mental illness begins to reverse, not just through individual recovery, but through collective transformation. A family learns to communicate differently. A community learns to listen differently. A culture begins to value connection over performance. You don't need to fix anyone. You don't need to have the perfect words. You just need to show up with presence and love. That alone can be the beginning of someone else's healing. So as we bring this part of the journey to a close, remember this. Asterisk, no brain, no heart, no soul heals alone. Asterisk, healing is not a solo performance. It's a symphony, and each of us has a part to play. Asterisk, asterisk, when we choose connection over isolation, we don't just change our lives, we change the very structure of the human experience. Asterisk, asterisk.